All right, I think the ad is over. So, um, hey everyone, my name is Clayton, and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Football stream. If you've never joined us before, this is a chance to talk fantasy football, which is a strategic-based game that obviously takes into account real life professional football, but in a metric and a dynamic similar to a strategy game like Risk, where you're choosing which players to start each and every week based on real life situations and real life matchups. And what we discuss on this channel is just fantasy football, our love for fantasy football, our love for the game, and what is best going forward into this upcoming week. So right now, what I have on screen is the NFL schedule. I've kind of done a bunch of different things in previous Friday night shows, and we're going to kind of go in the same order. But I'm going to utilize a couple of different mechanisms than what I've previously done. I've previously relied a lot on one specific website, and for some reason that's got a couple of problems with YouTube and when I put videos over there. So what I'm going to try to do is diversify it a little bit more. The other thing is I think my volume is messed up. Because it sounds kind of loud. Videos over there. So let me see if I can fix that really quickly. Yeah. There we go. I think that's much better. Let me just check, see if I can fix that really quick. Yeah. There we go. I think that's much better. Yeah, okay. So, I think that I fixed that, but what we're going to do is talk first about the Thursday night football game, and really just going to go over the game from a fantasy perspective. And then from that point on, we will go through looking at the schedule, which I have on screen, and talking about what games, picking out a couple games where there's potentially some really good fantasy matchups and fantasy implications. And then talk about, finally, before we go, just a little bit more about what I'm going to be doing on Tuesdays. Because there was a Tuesday show this week. It was not at any specific time. It just kind of came on. I ended up having more viewers than usual, which is cool, which is very cool. But what we're trying to do, I'm trying to shape the Tuesday show into something that's useful and helpful to people. So we're going to start, though, and I'll get to that at the end of the show. But this show is going to probably be a little bit shorter than normal. I'm just kind of going to run through some things. Today's kind of been a long day for me. But I still want to get on and stream for you guys. I know a couple people were out of town, and we're going to check the archive, so I wanted to make sure I got on at a good time so I could have the video processed and uploaded to YouTube. And I'll put the link in my description. I'm going to redo the overlays this weekend, update a Twitter handle that I'm going to use for this channel. So there's going to be a lot of things between now and Tuesday that I hope will make the channel more usable and more interactive. And that's my whole goal, is to make this so that anybody out there, anybody who has a passion for fantasy football can come here, can talk, because it's not like I'm just the expert. I think I'm good at playing fantasy football, but fantasy football is basically having eyes on teams. And I mean, I watch my team, my own team, the Giants, very closely, so I feel like I have a better understanding of them than anybody else. But I think that everybody who has their own individual team is going to have their own individual viewpoint. Like, we have one person who comes in the chat regularly who's pretty big Jets fan, and he understands how the Jets offense works and some of the details of it better than I could. And I'm a person who's in the area who can, see the Jets play if I really wanted to. Um, I mean, they're at the same stadium as the Giants. It's not like I'm going anywhere crazy, but I think that it just means there is a lot of eyes out there and a lot of potential to kind of grow this community and to help one another out and be better in our individual leagues. And hopefully, maybe next year we could get a league together and kind of talk strategy, talk strats, see what everybody's doing, see why this didn't work, why this didn't work, and use it for like money leagues or other stuff. And that would be great. And I think that's the goal of this channel. But first, we're just going to go quickly through Thursday night, talk about some of the fantasy stuff. But first, before we get into the fantasy, I'm going to take off that hat for a second. The Giants won a football game. The NFL season can start. Hallelujah. Thank God for the Redskins. Man, the Redskins, they're always there when you need them, right? But let's go through that first. So the game ended up being a interesting one in terms of fantasy, mainly on the Redskins side of the ball. The Giants kind of did, like if you look at the stat sheet, the Giants kind of did what the Giants do. Eli Manning had a pretty good game in terms of completion percentage. His accuracy was very good. He was in the 60% range in terms of passing. He didn't throw for a ton of yards, but had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, another clean sheet. He played the game very conservatively, I thought. Like there were a couple times in the red zone where I think they could have gone for something more, but at the end of the day, it worked out. They did give a number of carries, but their rushing game wasn't that effective. But at the same time, I think that it did enough to break up a passing game that I think the Giants passing game can be really explosive, and we're starting to see it. If you look at the New York Giants receiving numbers, let's just go down here for a quick minute. Ruben Randle had a very good game, and that is something that I kind of hoped for, but I didn't know if it was going to happen. Ruben Randle is a very talented player out of LSU, just like Odell Beckham. A couple years older, but has some time in the offense, is a really stout player. The only problem with him is that Ruben hasn't... He'll go away. He'll disappear for games on end. Like, he's one of those players that needs his ego massaged all the time. And, like, this week the Giants let go of Preston Parker, who's dropped every pass conceivable in an important situation. So they just dropped him, cut him, signed a defensive tackle, Kendrick Ellis, from Hampton, my alma mater, and who played for the Jets previously. Stout, kind of a run stuffer, more so than a quarterback pressure kind of person, but holds the middle really well. And I was surprised wasn't still on the roster, because he's a very much rosterable player. Like, I feel like he should be kind of active, especially with how I view the Giants' defensive line, as it's not very pressure based yet. But last night they hurried Cousins. They got Cousins kind of out of his comfort zone, and Cousins had a poor game, 2 picks. The yardage is kind of a misnomer, just because Washington was so behind late that they were throwing the ball. Like the score, the 32-21, the game really wasn't that close. And one of those Washington touchdowns was on a kick return. So we're talking about really one touchdown on the Redskins' part. And it didn't go to anybody fantasy relevant. It went to Chris Thompson. So Jordan Reed had a good game. He's a tight end I picked up in a couple of leagues as a backup, because there's been a lot of injuries plaguing the tight end position. But he had a good game. He had a solid game. I think he did very well in terms of where you want to see, he had a lot of targets. He was targeted 9 times. For a tight end, that's high. He came through with about 66% of those passes. So you're talking about a tight end who's targeted, who's getting the ball, and who's averaging about 16 yards per catch. That's a very good chunk. That means he's getting out into his routes. That's a player who you want on your fantasy team. Pierre Garçon had a solid game. He was targeted heavily, but he wasn't. He was the focal point. Without Deshaun Jackson in there, it's just hard for Pierre Garçon to be really great. And that's mainly because Pierre Garçon is a possession receiver. He has the speed, he has the ability to get open, but he is, I think, a little bit shackled by his quarterback in this system. He's going to have to run shorter patterns. He's going to have to run fewer big routes. So I think that's going to hamper Pierre Garçon. So everything about this game, in terms of the fantasy perspective, is pretty much what we as outsiders could see. Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be the focus. Got the most targets on the Giants team. The Giants running backs still are the classic version of a committee. You have nobody really getting any more touches than anybody else. Like, let me see the rushing stats. Yeah, Rashad Jennings did not lead the team. Andre Williams had 14 carries leading the team. Rashad Jennings had 11. Sean Vereen had 6. And because the Giants' passing offense was functioning and Ruben Randall was, utilizing open space, Shane Vereen really wasn't targeted that much as a receiver. I think he got 3 targets as a receiver and no catches. Yeah, 3 targets, no catches. So that just goes to show that Shane Vereen is a good player and I thought would be very good in the Giants' offense, but the Giants, especially once Victor Cruz comes back, are going to have all of their bases covered in the passing game without Shane Vereen. I think Shane Vereen still got a chance to have really good games. I think he's going to be used in certain situational games. Like this game, you have a weak secondary in the Redskins, so obviously your receivers are going to be more open. But in tougher games, in divisional games, well, maybe not divisional games since the division they're playing in isn't great. But in tougher games, in games on paper where you're like, ooh, the Giants are going to have a tough time in this game. Those are the games where I think Shane Vereen is going to be vital. He's going to be a great player for you in fantasy. Because if you have a game where Eli's going to have a hard time getting somebody open, or you've got secondaries like the Seahawks when Chancellor is back, or secondaries where you have a lot of very top tier corners like Cleveland with a couple corners and a lockdown corner in Joe Hayden, or if you have a team like the Jets who have Revis, teams with a corner who can stop somebody. Those corners will be on Odell Beckham, obviously. But you'll also have Victor Cruz, who's in the slot, but we don't know where he will be physically. I think he's going to because of the pace of his recovery, it'll be very good. He'll be the slot receiver. He'll take some of those double teams off Odell, give Odell a little bit more deep presence. And I think overall help Eli not only up his completion percentage even further, but get some of those crucial third downs. I think that's where Victor Cruz has missed most. And we saw that in the first 2 weeks with Preston Parker in there. Dropping key third down passes is not something Victor Cruz does. In the last Giants Super Bowl run, for instance, Victor Cruz in the NFC Championship game had like 16 catches. And most of them seem to come in huge spots. And that's where Victor Cruz shines. He's a playmaker in the truest sense. He makes plays when they need to be matter. So his ability to come back in week 4, again, puts you in the position of play Shane Vereen when you see a matchup that the Giants probably shouldn't win. If it looks like a team that the Giants shouldn't beat, if it looks like a team with a very good record and a very good defense, even if they're a good record and a bad defense, like if they were to play the Pats, for instance, I don't know their schedule offhand, like what weeks is what week, but the Patriots don't have a very good defense, but have a very, very strong offense, so they kind of control games and they dictate how the game flow goes. But if the Giants were to play the Patriots, that would be a team that I would say play Shane Vereen. Any game where the Giants should win, avoid Vereen. because games that the Giants should win and the secondary on the opposing team isn't that great, the Giants will probably put the ball in the air more or rely on a rushing attack that's centered around their pounders. Andre Williams, who's their physical running back, and Rashad Jennings, who's their kind of finesse, skilled back. Shane Vereen gets carries when, you know, halfback draws. Eli looks up, hands off to Vereen to go forward. So I think that's where we're going to see the majority of, the pivotal plays or the usefulness of Shane Vereen. The Giants got a safety. The Giants defense actually for a lot of the night was, almost fantasy viable, but I would never say start the Giants defense. I thought the Redskins defense might do more because Eli had been showing some, signs of hesitancy. But instead, Eli had a very good game. There wasn't that much in terms of defensive pressure. All the fumbles seem to be on the Redskins end. Like the Giants ended up with one total sack. So again, that's not enough. But the Redskins, on the other hand, didn't get a sack. And that's what I thought they were going to be able to do. I thought they were going to be able to pressure Eli a bit more in the pocket, maybe force a bad throw, maybe a pick six. That's why they were a stretch play for me in terms of defenses to roll with. I mean, there are a couple defenses out there that I thought had better matchups, and we're going to talk about some defenses that I would say start this weekend because of injuries. But I think that pretty much takes us through our Thursday night recap. Again, it was a good overall game for the Giants. The Redskins, Matt Jones is a player a lot of people picked up off the waiver wire. I know he didn't have a great game statistically, but he did end up taking over, I think, sole control over the running back position. He had the most carries. The reason that he didn't get more was that the game kind of got out of reach. See, 11 carries, 38 yards, long of 10. Alfred Morris, on the other hand, only got 6 carries. So Matt Jones is taking over that lead back role in Washington. So if he's the lead back, what do you do with Alfred Morris? Alfred Morris, I heard one of my friends ask me for advice about Alfred Morris and a trade for C.J. Anderson. I feel like C.J. Anderson's done in Denver. Ronnie Hillman fits the offense better, but at the same time, Alfred Morris now seems to be done in Washington. I think Washington has more potential for him because I think it will end up being more of a true split between Matt Jones and Alfred Morris. C.J. Anderson, I think at some point, with his injury history as well, is going to fall by the wayside. And you're going to have Ronnie Hillman and potentially some of the other young backs in the offense take over for C.J. Anderson. But at the same time, Matt Jones, for those who went out and got him this week and plugged him in right away, it's okay. It's okay. I think that it was a smart call on your part. But I think that his best fantasy days are not behind him. It wasn't a one-week wonder. We see it in the touches that he's going to continue to lead the ball carrying. He has the more explosiveness. He should have had a touchdown, but a good defensive play actually forced the ball out as he was diving in, and the ball went out of the back of the end zone for a touchback. Otherwise, we're talking about a Matt Jones who had, a 40-yard rushing game with a touchdown, a 10-point fantasy night for a dude you picked up off the waiver wire this week. Not too bad, not great, but at the same time, you were never expecting him to be your lead back. He's somebody you were going to plug in your flex, somebody you were going to utilize as an RB2 in really good matchup weeks. So this is a guy who I think still has that same usability, and that is important. And especially it's important because you're talking week 3. You've got somebody week 3 who is going to just grow with the offense, grow over the course of the season, and you'll be able to use him in a bunch of different spots. And that's what you want out of a fantasy player. So I think that's still a good waiver wire pickup. I still think you'll be able to do things with him. And I think that showcases the week-by-week nature of fantasy football. But don't get too high on a player one week and too low on a player the next week. One last thing, Josh Brown is a kicker to own just because the Giants for a lot of this season have already started to stall in the red zone. Again, with Victor Cruz coming back, I think that will lessen, but he still is very accurate, and the Giants don't put him in crazy field goals positions. He's not going to be kicking 5-point field goals. He's going to be kicking a lot. When I say 5-point field goals, I mean field goals over 50 yards. They're going to put him in the 40 to 35 yard range, and he'll kick that consistently. Um, so, Josh Brown, if you need a kicker, if he's available in your league, he might be somebody to look at if your kicker's been letting you down. Just an extra FYI. That takes us through the Thursday night game, I think. And before we get to this week's games, this week's slate of games, the one thing I wanted to talk about was injury report. And this is something that I'm going to start adding into the Friday show. And if we ever do a Sunday morning show or something else like that, it's something that I'd highlight. But this week's injury report's particularly interesting because you have Eddie Lacy, who'd been, on the fringes of being back into being playing this week. He practiced today. He practiced Friday. So that gives you a little bit of extra hope that Eddie Lacy will be available this week. Also, on the Green Bay Packers, Devontae Freeman, a wide receiver a lot of people picked up, is also going to be available. So that's two players that are probably in a lot of people's fantasy lineups. The other player, and probably the most noted player that I'm going to talk about, is Drew Brees. Drew Brees has officially been ruled out with a rotator cuff problem. That's potentially very big because I think Drew Brees, that is an issue that is going to last this season. So if Drew Brees was your quarterback, and a lot of people were hesitant about Drew Brees, especially because the offseason the Saints had, getting rid of Kenny Stills, getting rid of Jimmy Graham. That's their deep threat. That's their, possession tight end, one of the best red zone options in the league. They got rid of both those players. They focused on their line. They focused on their running backs. They gave Mark Ingram a big contract. They gave their center a big contract. It just looked like they were focused on rushing the ball, pounding the ball, and trying to slightly improve their defense. Well, their defense is not improved. Their defense actually might be one of the worst in the NFL. Their offense has looked terrible just because there's not much skill position in their skill position. Brandon Cooks, who had a couple really good games early last year, has kind of fizzled, and most of that's just because they can't really get into a flow offensively. There's a lot of running the ball and not getting much. Mark Ingram's looking like Mark Ingram 2013, very tentative, very slow, very lethargic, not very good. So it's going to be rough sledding if you have any Saints players, especially Saints wide receivers. Brandon Coleman, somebody I picked up who I've since dropped this week for a waiver wire play position. There are a bunch of players on the Saints. Marcus Colston, probably not viable. Josh Hill, you should get rid of, was supposed to replace Jimmy Graham, but is nowhere to be seen. Even Mark Ingram, somebody you might want to think about trying to move. If he's your RB1, you're in trouble. Because, especially if they're using a backup quarterback, they're going to try to feed him. But the entire defensive line knows it's going to Mark Ingram. So he might get 20 carries, but Mark Ingram is not the running back who's going to explode on you, who's going to have that one carry that gets him 40 yards. That's not Mark Ingram. He's just not that fast. He's just not that athletic. He's a plotter. He's a slow, methodical running back. He's been that way since Alabama. He's just not that player who's exciting and who's going to get you, a huge gain, a big run. Somebody who can break it open, who can see a crease and get it. He's not an Arian Foster. He's not a Le'Veon Bell. He's just not that kind of player. So, especially with the defenses now keyed on him, he's also not an Adrian Peterson. He's not a person who can see a 9-man box every single snap and do something about it. So it's going to be rough sledding for Mark Ingram. So I think that if he's like your RB2 or he's one of your main running backs, you're going to have to look elsewhere. And the pickings are slim. But you might be able to grab somebody like James Starks. And if Eddie Lacy's down this week, who he's probable to, like, right now he was listed as questionable. All right, he's going to get an official injury designation tomorrow because their game is Monday night. But he did practice in a limited fashion today. So that would be like saying he didn't practice on Wednesday, but practice limitedly on Thursday. He'll probably practice full on Saturday. Or even if he doesn't practice full on Saturday, he'll probably be either questionable or probable. And if it's probable, he's going to play. If it's questionable, it's a game time. But most likely, he'll play because he's seen work. I think that the one thing I would say is probably if you have Eddie Lacy, don't expect a huge game from him. I think that James Starks will be used a good bit to spell him, especially because it's early in the season. So, I mean, just if you have Eddie Lacy, know that you're going to need to get more of your fantasy points from other sources. He's not going to be his routine, like 12 fantasy points, 10 fantasy points, the usual Eddie Lacy game. So just be aware of that. If Dion Lewis is available in your league, he might be a good player to pick up. LeGarrette Blount is a player that I think is going to have a good week because they're going against the Jags. The Jags are a bad defense, bluntly. The Patriots can go up and down the field of them all day. So what I think that they're going to do is start bleeding the clock out. And Dion Lewis has a fumbling issue, has fumbled in both games so far this season. One was lost, one was recovered. But he's got a fumbling issue. He's not a big back, but LeGarrette Blount is. And LeGarrette Blount is somebody that you can hand the ball off and just get a couple yards. He's somebody that people might have dropped after his bad week last week. Pick him up and play him instead of Ingram this weekend. Because LeGarrette Blount fits this game plan. And the Patriots are about game plans. They're not necessarily about one lead back. We saw that when the lead back who had a 230-yard game got cut in the offseason. Like, got cut during training camp. That's the Patriots. They don't care who the running back is. They really don't care who the wide receivers are. As long as Tom Brady's there, Rob Gronkowski's there, and the line's solid, they'll be fine. And that's their kind of mentality. And it's working for them. And I think it will continue working. LeGarrette Blount will be the beneficiary of it this weekend. And that's why I wanted to say, if you have any other New England Patriot, start them. Start Edelman, start Gronk. I think that there are a couple players who you might not think about, and I certainly did, but when I look at the game, there are, like Edelman, obviously, with his amazing amount of targets, but when you look at an Andre Dobson, he becomes a sneaky play this week, especially because their coverage is so poor on Jacksonville. So you could see, like, a game where you have Andre Dobson getting, 7 catches. Or maybe this is the week that Damian Amendola kind of gets involved in the offense. He's kind of spot starting. Like, he's playing when Edelman is subbed out or when Edelman needs a breather. He's filling the same role. So I don't see him going off crazy, but I think Aaron Dobson is a player to play. Because I wouldn't say the true receiver, but the, taller, athletic player who can get down the field, who can run an actual post pattern. While Julian Edelman just kind of finds a seam and squares up. He plays like Wes Welker. He just kind of gets the ball, gets a couple yards, and falls down. He's not a great player. He's not extremely athletic. He just is open, usually, because the Patriots will dink and dump down the field to him. That's why 19 targets, 8 yards a catch. Not great numbers, but he's there. Gronk is the player who's going to get you everything. Gronk might have a 4-touchdown game. If you have Gronkowski, have fun this weekend. he could go insane. He could have one of the best fantasy days for a tight end in a while. So just be happy about that. But that kind of takes us into the schedule. For before I would usually pick out a couple games, and I'm still gonna do that. I've talked about the New England Jacksonville game, but there's like three other games that I kind of want to highlight. But I was gonna go through very quickly just each game, just talk about the players, any intrigue, any matchups. So let's start. Let's just go through them quickly. Browns Raiders. Interesting note of that game is Johnny Manziel will not be starting at quarterback, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But also for those who went and picked up Travis Benjamin, who I was a big proponent of, who I thought would, he's got a deep ball threat with Johnny Manziel, he becomes a lot less interesting. In his first half of the first game of the season, when McNown was the quarterback, McNown and him really weren't on the same page. He didn't really get going until Johnny Football came in and threw the deep bomb to him for the touchdown. And then it was the next week where he was, out there going deep, going long, and Johnny Manziel was hitting him on boots and stuff that let long plays develop. Travis Benjamin's not going to get you catches like a Julian Edelman. He's just not that kind of player. So McNown being named the starter is a huge hit to his fantasy value, and I think a huge hit to Cleveland's fantasy value, because you're just not as exciting. You just don't have the player that opens things up for an offense. And I really don't understand the move from a real football point of view or a fantasy football point of view. I think that because of this, I think the Raiders are a better play. I like Latavius Murray this week. Cleveland's secondary is good, but they're after looking at it, their line is like the fifth best in the league in terms of fantasy production for running backs. So running backs playing against Cleveland are doing very well. And Cleveland hasn't really showcased a desire. They're not playing, top flight competition. They're the Browns right now. I think they're 1-1, but I'm trying to remember who they played the previous weeks. They played the Titans, and they played the Jets. So the Jets have Chris Ivory, but those aren't two really elite running teams. The Jets are a ground and pound team, but if you're still in fifth place after those being your two games with no Adrian Peterson, no Marshawn Lynch, no Aaron Foster, no major running backs playing against, I think Latavius Murray's bound to have a good game, especially because I don't see the Browns making this a shootout. It's not like with Johnny Manziel where they could go up a couple scores and make the Raiders press them. It's the opposite. It's the Raiders who could get up and chew the clock with Murray. So I think Latavius Murray's a good start. I think he's been decent all season. He's been just outside of flex range, I think, most of the time. Now he's a flex play easy. He might even be an RB2. And I just think the way that game goes, it will be a Raider win. And I think it's going to make people question why you would take out Johnny Manziel. Bengals Ravens, not much to say about that. Bengals have a decent defense. Ravens have been struggling. My key on that game is just looking at where the Justin Forsett, the Friends Talaferro situation is in the running back committee that's kind of developing in the Ravens. And on the other side of the ball, with Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill, who was kind of the lead back there. Jeremy Hill had a couple fumbles last week. Bernard came in, had a decent game. Does that kind of move it back to 50-50? Because Jeremy Hill was kind of dominating carries for a little while. So just those are two teams with running back committee situations that really probably shouldn't be committees. Or if they are committees, should be more, solidified. So we'll see. We'll see what Ravens defense decides to show up. Are they a Ravens defense that's going to hold a team like Denver to a low scoring total, force a lot of turnovers? Or are they a Ravens defense that's going to give up, 38 points to the Raiders. I mean, just who's going to show up for the Ravens? What is this Ravens team? They're 0-2 right now, so this is a big game for them, especially in the division. Then you have the Saints and the Panthers, and we talked about this one already. Drew Brees isn't going to be there. Saints defense looks in shambles. Cam Newton has literally nobody to throw to. Jericho Cotchery's not going to play. So, it's just going to be it's gonna be a hard game to watch. But I think that the Panthers will win, and I think that Cam Newton will somehow manage to have a decent fantasy day. Another thing that to pay attention to is Jonathan Stewart's questionable. So if Jonathan Stewart doesn't play, the question is who gets those carries? Who's the backup there? Because, for instance, I don't know a whole lot other than Jonathan Stewart. It used to be DeAngelo Williams, and we see he's still got some playing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But the backup to Jonathan Stewart, in terms of carries, according to their depth chart, is Fozzie Whitaker. So I don't know if Fozzie Whitaker is ownable. I mean, against this, it's a great matchup. Saints can't stop anybody. You would hope Jonathan Stewart's in there so you can play him. But if not, I just don't know enough if Fozzie Whitaker is the true number 2 there. Or if Carlos Artis-Payne or Brandon Wagner, who I've never heard of. Are these players going to play? Are these players on the roster? Or Mike Tolbert, who's technically a fullback, is going to get carries. There's just not a lot of info there. And right now, the stats, it's Jonathan Stewart with most rushes, followed by Cam Newton, followed by Mike Tolbert with 6. So, do you pick up Mike Tolbert and start him, a fullback? I just don't know. I just don't know if that's, worth it. Tolbert's averaging 7.2 yards a rush with a long of 13. So he's, getting good yards. It's just, is he the next man up? And he might be. He might be a player that you should think about adding if Jonathan Stewart is out. Just because the matchup's so good. The Saints are that bad right now. And without Drew Brees, it's just hard to imagine how bad they're going to be. So going back to the schedule, Falcons-Cowboys is a game I wanted to talk about. The real question is, what is Dallas' offense going to be? Can you start anybody from a fantasy standpoint in Dallas? You have Tony Romo being out, Des Bryant being out. Is Joseph Randle a running back? Is Darren McFadden a running back? Because they're going to have to lean on those players with Brandon Weeden at your quarterback. Brandon Weeden's more of a game manager who kind of was ousted from Cleveland just because he couldn't stay healthy and couldn't really get a consistent string of games where he wasn't throwing a bunch of interceptions. I want to see if Jason Witten still can be fantasy relevant, especially with his injuries. He's got 2 sprained ankles and a sprained knee, so he's just broken. He doesn't miss a lot of games. He hasn't missed I think he's missed 1 game in his entire career. So it's just gonna be interesting to see where that goes. From the Falcons' standpoint of view, the Falcons are high flying, and Julio Jones is just eating right now. So whether Matt Ryan can really put together impressive performance, I don't have any worries about Julio Jones. The one thing I would be interested in to see, who becomes that wide receiver number 2? Does Roddy White come back? Because he had a really off week against the Giants, whereas Leonard Hankerson, who they picked up in the offseason from the Redskins, had a great week. Had a touchdown, was utilized a couple times in the red zone, would have had another touchdown if there wasn't a penalty. Had a really solid game and was creating mismatches. He has good hands, he has good ability. So whether he becomes a number 2 or a number 3 or somebody that's rosterable is kind of up in the air. But it's a year where the wide receivers have been kind of all over the place, and there are very few strong wide receivers. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Buccaneers Texans. Interesting game. just because I don't know how good the Bucks defense is. I still think they're a defense that you can start all your players against, um, and start players against that you normally wouldn't start because the matchup will be so good for you, because the Bucks aren't that good. But yeah, the other question is, um, DeAndre Hopkins might be out with a concussion, so that's something to monitor. Um, who steps up for the Texans offense? Again, it's like a game with the Panthers. There's a lot of the names that we're familiar with that aren't going to be playing and aren't going to be there. So it's just going to be a hard thing to. It's going to be a hard game to watch and a hard game to really analyze. There's not going to be much there for us. There's not going to be much there to watch. There's not going to be many fantasy players. So if you have a fantasy player on either one of those teams, I would probably avoid it. The Texans have a good front seven, so Doug Martin's kind of off the table. Up there, the Bucks tight end Stephen Jenkins is out with an injury for 4 to 6 weeks. So there's just not much fantasy utility there. And the Texans, on the other hand, just have had really a poor offense all season, so I think that's going to continue. To speed this up a little bit, the Colts versus the Titans. I think the Colts will have a comeback week. Start Andrew Luck, start T.Y. Hilton if he's available, and really just I would monitor the running back situation in Indianapolis to see if Josh Robinson, the backup, Roberson, actually comes into his own and starts getting the carries from Frank Gore, or Frank Gore has a resurgence of sorts. Titans, obviously, there's not much to look at there. Mariota's potentially something interesting, but the Colts defense isn't very good. So, if you have to start a Texan, if you have Bishop Shanky or somebody else, they might be worth starting. But at the same time, it's not something that I would say, oh yes, start all your Titans. Jaguars, Patriots, we already went over. Start all your Patriots. Patriots are going to roll huge numbers for Brady and company. Feel confident about that game. Chargers versus Vikings. Want to see what Philip Rivers continues to do. He's been having a very good season. Stevie Johnson is having a very good season. Keenan Allen's the interesting player in that game, just because does he have a huge start game like he did week 1, or does he have a kind of mediocre game, like, not mediocre, really, it was dreadful, but a mediocre real-life game in week 2. The Vikings, Adrian Peterson's going to continue to hammer the ball out, but because Adrian Peterson is getting so many carries, where does that leave Teddy Bridgewater and the rest of the Vikings receiving core like Charles Johnson? And is there any utility there? So that's going to be something to watch for. My guess would be it's back to 2005, where it's been the same story since then. Adrian Peterson is really the only person to start in Minnesota and the only person you can feel comfortable with. Jets, Eagles. DeMarco Murray is kind of hurt. The Eagles' offense is in worse shape than he is. They can't block anybody. They can't stop anybody. Their defense is dreadful. Their offense is worse. The Jets, on the other hand, have a great defense. Even if Revis is out, their defense is still very strong, especially in the front line. They send great pressure. They're on the other side of the ball. They're superiorly more effective with Ryan Fitzpatrick than they have ever been with Geno Smith. Ryan Fitzpatrick is light years ahead of Geno Smith as a quarterback. The addition of Brandon Marshall gives Ryan Fitzpatrick a security blanket. Brandon Marshall's had 100 yards for the past 2 weeks, or 100 yards last week, and then a great game the week before that. He's scored in both weeks. He's looked at in the red zone. If you got him like I did early or like later on in your draft, where people were looking at wide receiver 3s, you got one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. That low. I'm not making that up. That's what the stats say. Through this many weeks, he's one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. And I don't think that's going to change. I mean, he might drop lower than that, and just statistically, because he's not going to have huge games because he's not a receiver like Odell Beckham who's going to catch one pass and go 70 yards with it, or Julio Jones that can take the top off the defense. But at the same time, he's going to get you. He's going to be targeted 7, 8 times, 10 times a game. He's going to catch 8 passes, 6 passes. He's going to score a touchdown most weeks. He'll probably end the season with like 10, 11 touchdowns. I just see the Jets being just outclassing the Eagles this weekend. The Steelers, Rams. The Rams defense was great week 1, horrible week 2. We want to see which is the real Rams defense. The Steelers, on the other hand, have an offense that puts up yards all over the place. Ben Roethlisberger is going crazy. Le'Veon Bell's back. The Steelers could score a lot of points. The Steelers are probably one of the teams with the most fantasy potential out of all the NFL. The 49ers, great week 1, horrible week 2. Go against the Cardinals. Cardinals, I want to see who the running back for the Cardinals is, and if Larry Fitzgerald can continue being Larry Fitzgerald of, again, 2009. Like, we're seeing players resurrect, like fantasy players that we know and love, and who we've kind of forgot about because they're older. We're thinking they're getting towards the end of their careers, and then they come back, and Larry Fitzgerald has 2-3 touchdown catches. It's amazing. It's kind of boggling, but this is what happens when you have a healthy Carson Palmer, a decent line, and some running backs to relieve some of the pressure. So I think the Cardinals are in a good shape. I want to see the 49ers defense try, like really like buckle down because they have talent. I just think that if they can keep games closer, it makes more offensive players on the 49ers relevant. Like, I could see Vernon Davis being better. Carlos Hyde, had a great week 1 and then fell off the cliff because they just were out of the game. So Carlos Hyde's value really depends on can the 49ers keep games close. And we'll see how that progresses. The Bills-Dolphins. LeSean McCoy's health is most important to me in that game. I think Lamar Miller is, what he is. He's just not a top-tier running back. He's not that great. He's injured too often. So it really comes down to, from a fantasy perspective, watching how good LeSean McCoy can be and can he really continue to thrive. Tyrod Taylor, a guy I love. I think he's doing so much from a fantasy perspective. I think he continues that with the Dolphins, who have had, up and down weeks. And I just think he'll manage the game a little bit better than he did against the Pats. I think if he can keep the turnovers down and still he's gotten 40-plus rushing yards both weeks so far this season. So he's going to get you some rushing points. He's going to get you a touchdown. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff happening in Buffalo from a fantasy perspective. Chicago Seahawks, I want to see the Seahawks offense go crazy. Marshawn Lynch might be out, which in my mind, if you own like a receiver from Seattle or Jimmy Graham or Russell Wilson, this might be the week to like really see what they're worth. Because if they can't put up big numbers against the Bears, who have no defense, then it's just going to be a rough season if you have those players. Especially if you have like a Russell Wilson as your quarterback and like he's your QB1. I saw people taking him like third quarterback off the board. It was just so high. It seemed very, very high to me. Especially when you could gotten a Tony Romo or a Matt Ryan, later 6th round. So it just, but I think that this is the gut check test, especially with a player like Jimmy Graham. This is the week to lean on him, especially if Marshawn Lynch is out. If Marshawn Lynch is out, this is the week you gotta lean on Jimmy Graham. And if you don't, and I don't see what the trade was for. I don't see why you wasted that draft pick if you're gonna trade for a player and then just not utilize him. The Broncos Lions, the late game. Matt Stafford's hurt. Calvin Johnson's not hurt, but not 100%. The Lions line doesn't seem to be able to protect anybody. On the other hand, the Broncos defense is getting after everyone, causing turnovers, scoring points. So I think the thing to watch for from a fantasy perspective is the backfields. Does Amir Abdullah keep the kind of number one running back spot for the day from Joique Bell? Who's the Denver Broncos backfield headed by? I want to say it's going to be Ronnie Hillman, but we're going to see. Can Peyton Manning continue from last week, his good game last week, his 3 touchdown game last week? Can he continue that into this week? I personally think he can. I personally think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I would say like 24 points wins it. I just don't see either team kind of like shooting the other one out, especially because it's in Detroit. So I think that's kind of the matchups. Oh, and Monday night. Monday nights can be dictated a lot by who plays. If the Packers play, if the Packers, not the Packers play, they will play. If Eddie Lacy plays, if Devontae Adams plays, it's gonna be. I think that it's gonna be an interesting game. I think that's one that probably it's a Monday night game, but it's probably gonna be the best game to watch of the weekend. It has 2 compelling teams, 2 very evenly matched teams, 2 strong teams playing each other. I think Jamaal Charles could have a good game. The Packers defense is playing really well. They have linebackers. They have strong fronts. But at the same time, I think Jamaal Charles is going to try to make up for his 2 fumble game. And we'll see. I think they have to get Jamaal Charles more back out of the backfield touches, because that's where he's really strong in space. But I think that game is probably the most intriguing one from a real life perspective. From a fantasy perspective, I think you start your Packers, but tone down your expectations just a little bit, because the Chiefs have a good defense. And on the Chiefs side, you start your Chiefs, but tone down your expectations for a little bit because the Packers have a decent defense. That's really all I have to say on that one. It's kind of one of those games that's just up there. Great game to watch in real life, but from a fantasy perspective, not all that interesting. But I guess that covers it. We talked about injuries. We talked about the games, what's coming up. We talked about the Thursday night game. So the one thing I wanted to do before I went was to say that I did start a show on Tuesday. On Tuesday we start at 8:30, which is not going to be the regular scheduled time, but I think that we're going to try to do it at 7. Try to have that show at 7 on Tuesdays, and we're going to talk mainly about waiver wire and a little bit about the past weekend, but mainly about waiver wire. And then use the Friday show for what we did, the recaps, looking forward to Sunday, and I'm definitely want to do more on injuries. The other thing I'm going to try to work on, I'm trying to get a way to, be more visual with the stream. I have a couple screens that I flipped through, but I want to do more in terms of, first of all, I'm going to work over the weekend. I'm working on this overlay. I'm going to add, the YouTube page, the Twitter handle that I'm going to be using to take questions and stuff. So this is going to be a little bit of redesign by the next time you see it. The other thing that I want to do, and I want to add, either some subtle background music or something to, add to the stream. But we will see. Those are all things that are going to be work in progress, obviously. But I hope to see you on Tuesday at 7 o'clock is the time I'm shooting for. The show's still going to be at 6:30 on Fridays. That's not going to change. The Friday schedule is good. I was a little late today because I was dealing with some personal things. Been a rough day, but yeah, it's good to get on the stream, talk about fantasy football, especially because now people are talking about getting into the stream. I had most viewers I've ever had on Tuesday. And people are, asking me, was there YouTube? Can I missed the stream? Can I watch it here? So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you guys liking the content. And we just, it's just fun talking about this, fun getting on a couple of times a week, having something to do that, is interactive and gets me talking. So I hope you guys have a great fantasy weekend, as good as the Giants had against the Redskins last night. So I will hopefully see you on Tuesday. And if not, have a great week, and I will catch you later. Peace.